Hello and welcome to filmkidasks, the podcast where I ask questions to working professionals in the film industry from the perspective of someone just getting started. My name is Jordan, and today I'm joined by Canadian producer from projects like Balletlujah, the Country Music Awards, and In the Tall Grass, and countless commercials, Brent Kawchuk. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks.
So in my mind, producing is one of those things that has a little bit of mystique around it. It's obviously a very important part of any production, but I think there's a lot of film students that don't necessarily understand the specifics of the role. Can you walk me through briefly what your job is as a service producer when you develop or work on a project?
That's a tough one. Producing is a real misnomer in a lot of ways, and it's a term and a title that's thrown onto many things, rightly or wrongly, of the job. Sometimes it's given to people in a kind of a royal queen kind of way that there's not really any expectations behind it. But then there's also production management, executive producers that deal with financing. There's people in business affairs that often have a producer title. And then there's people that is more what I do. I kind of have a crossover in more of the creative aspect of production, whereas I try to get the director and the creative team through their project successfully and support them however I can with the crew, with the budget, with resources, but also in approvals and accountability. That in my world, working with commercials and broadcasters, there's always an end client, there's always somebody that you're answering to that has given you the opportunity to make this. So it's always that fine line of getting everybody to do their best, letting them have enough time and resources to do their best, but getting it done at the end of the day and meeting everybody's expectations. So in a sense, producing is, the last person that has that accountability to making the creative process the best it can be, but then making sure the end result is done on time and hopefully on budget.
So what was your path into producing?
It was a strange one because it's not like I know some of the people that are listening because they want to produce, and it's something that I kind of morphed into. I studied education in university and had every intention of being a teacher. But while I was in university studying, I worked for the campus radio station, campus television station, and campus newspaper, and wrote for music magazines on the side just as a hobby because music was a passion for me. And when I got out to teach, there wasn't a teaching job to be had. And I was all of 21 trying to get a job as a high school teacher, which, could be a sitcom or something, but it just wasn't a real thing that I could get myself into. So I went back to school to make the hobby the job. And I went back and studied journalism at the University of Regina, which I chose because I could use my existing degree and it had an internship, which at the time wasn't as common as I think a lot of other programs have now. So I could go to school for 2 years, and one semester I could be out in the field working. And so it was more through that. And then what got me back into it was pitching a show. And just to back up, I was substitute teaching while I was in journalism school. And one day I got a call from a director friend named Grant Harvey, who said, "Hey, we're shooting this music video tomorrow. Can you come in and be third AD?" Basically trying to convince people to be in the crowd shots and wrangle the crowd for a Tragically Hip video. And I thought, well, do I want to go substitute teach drama or do that? So I canceled the substitute gig and went and did that and started to do more work with them, with his company at the time. But really it was when I went back through journalism school. I got out of journalism school and I was writing for, this is really dating things, but before every organization had a website, every organization you could think of had a magazine. So I worked for a magazine house where I wrote for like Golf Course Landscape Digest and, no joke, Canadian Funeral News. So I wrote entire articles about the funeral industry and decided this is not what I want to do. So I came up with an idea for a kids show based on my background as a teacher, of how to do a magazine program for kids, but was also by kids. It was truly interactive long before that was ever a thing. And I shot a pilot because I knew these guys that I had worked with that did commercials and music videos, and that was Grant and a lot of other friends that said, "Can you help me do this pilot?" And so we did a pilot for this kids show, and the network said, "No, we love it, but we just can't afford to do it." So I took that tape back to the next year's graduating class at the U of R just to show them what I had done. And in the crowd was a visiting professor, a guy named Knowlton Nash, who was very famous news guy, predecessor to Peter Mansbridge on the CBC. And he saw it and said, hey, I love this. Here's who you should send it to. So I sent it to the CBC on their behalf, and they turned it into a 6-episode series. And so my first producing gig was a national kids show, in a sense, on CBC, outside of a few commercials and music videos. So it was really thrown right into it. And that involved writing, producing, hosting at the time. And that led me to other things from there. CBC Street Sense, I did that for a while. And from there grew into commercials and documentaries and everything else.
That's amazing. So you really were thrown in the deep end there.
Yeah, it wasn't by design necessarily. It was an evolution, which I think happens for a lot of people in producing, because it can happen through a lot of disciplines, right? Like you can have, production designers that will move through that, editors often, directors crossed over to produce, writers. There's a lot of disciplines that you will come from or often cross back and forth to have that title.
Right. So you mentioned this earlier, but you did study teaching and communication and journalism. So how has your education in those different areas affected and helped you as a producer?
For me, I think it's there's a lot of discipline going through a program like that. I still carry a lot of things with me in both of those, the teaching degree and especially the journalism degree, that those programs can be fantastic because you don't know what you're going to get from them. You think you're going in to do one thing, and you come out with another. And what they have is a lot of depth. But specific things I took with me, like I went into journalism school to be a print reporter and never intended to do television and all of those things, and had a lot of success that way. Anytime I tried television, because I thought it was more fun or more glamorous or any of that, it just didn't go well in school. But my print stuff always went well. But I think discipline and writing skill and having somebody really look at your writing often and with a real microscope is what I took the most out of my journalism degree. And being able to write succinctly and punchy, which I think is even more important in the world that we're in. And a lot of interview skills as well. The thing that I think I took most out of my journalism degree was I worked every third weekend at the Regina Leader-Post, at the newspaper. And I would go in on Friday at 5, and they'd give me a police scanner, and I'd have to listen to it all weekend and chase ambulances for real. That's a real thing. It's not just a term. And then I would leave again at like 6 a.m. Monday morning, and the entire Monday paper would be by me, which was kind of cool. And I got to have bylines, and I got to have published work while I was in school. And I think for me, that degree had a real practical element to it. Not only the internship that I got, but they encouraged me to freelance. And if I sold an article, that wasn't a no-no. That wasn't taking away from my studies. That was like, that's the point, to make money doing this. And so if I sold an article, they would mark it, and I get to hand that in. So I think a lot of that encouraged a lot of hustle that the journalism program had at the time.
That's awesome. So kind of shifting gears, where do you find the properties and ideas that you generate, and then how do you go about developing them?
They come from a variety of sources. Over the past, we've had broadcasters come to us, and they would have a format that they've purchased, such as crazy things like a take on Canada's Worst Driver. They said, we want you to do this show, please figure it out. Other times, they will tell you, and this is all just relationships with them. Here's what we have an appetite for. Here's what we're trying to develop. And it's a lot of homework too, watching networks to see what they're buying, what they're looking for, what's successful for them, so that you are going in with somebody saying, hey, got this great idea, and it's completely not something that they would play. So a lot of it is, doing your homework, finding out what people are playing and making, but also trying to maintain relationships with those decision makers, so that you're not always just walking in and it's a pitch from beginning to end. And it's that whole TV notion of pitching, like, hey, I got this, are you ready? And it's not like that at all. It's always a dialogue. What do you need, and how can we make this suit you better? It's always a little softer than some of the things you see. Some of the properties we do, we have a very disciplined development session that we have as a group. There's 8 of us as a company, and we sit down every 2 weeks, at the end of a Friday, and it's just no ideas are bad ideas, and we look for things that we can kind of move forward and fresh ideas. Or we'll target a particular broadcaster and say, okay, here's what CBC Gem is publishing and what they're looking for. what can we do? Sometimes we seek out different partners. If we know that there's a tremendous food host that we think has potential, we'll talk to them and work an idea up with them. Sometimes people approach us with ideas, and then we just have to work that out as to how we share that cost and responsibility to get an idea in front of the broadcasters. So they come in no two ways the same.
That's completely fair. I mean, it was a hard question to answer. But you did mention pitching, and obviously that is a huge part of your job. How can young people improve their pitching skills?
Hmm. Wow, that's a good question. It's writing more than anything. I see pitches that people bring to me, and they will be beautiful decks with design and photography and all these wonderful things that look good, but you can't figure out what it's about until you get to the end. So I think that's something I learned from news too, is that your title, your subhead, and your first paragraph better nail it. There should be no guess as to what that show is, what that idea is, and give an entire picture that way. So I think it's being succinct without making it dry. Back in the day, we didn't have all these tools, but everybody has these tools to make wonderfully designed things and dead links and trailers and all of that. But if you don't have the succinct one paragraph thing, and it's no cliche, the elevator version, then all the rest can't follow it. So I think in terms of pitching, it's not about having the bells and whistles. It's about just having it down and having your idea so well focused that it's something that you can say in a sentence or two.
Yeah, that's very good advice. So, again, shifting gears a little bit, but you have done this really broad and diverse body of work. So, how does producing drama work and documentaries differ from producing things like commercials or short form projects?
Well, that's something about being out west in that we've had to diversify, and any filmmaker out here will tell you that, including some of the ones you've talked to already. There's a survival to having to diversify out here. So it's not always by choice that we out here go into commercials and music videos and documentaries and food shows and award shows and drama. Just the volume isn't there to specialize in one thing, which is a disadvantage and an advantage at the same time. The skills you have of making a commercial, being able to tell a story in 60 seconds, well, that's a real skill. And so if you can do that, you can sure tell one in 60 minutes. And it doesn't always go the other way, but it's just a way that you can hone your skills quickly and do it more often than just working at one big project. So that is the advantage of having a varied background in the kinds of productions you do. You get to try things more often, I think, than other people in other markets.
So, kind of going off of that, there's obviously going to be different challenges doing, drama work and commercials and stuff than doing documentaries and like live shows, especially like the award shows. So what are the kind of challenges that come with doing live things and planning that?
Oh, the live world it's amazing. It is such a rush. Other than sports, there's not a lot to it these days. And well, even more and more, like you watch the Junos and the CSA Awards, we're not live award shows this year. And this is going to be, just as a sidebar, this is going to be a trend for the whole event and award show world for a little while. But, you put on a show like the Canadian Country Music Awards. I was either producer or creative producer, different roles in that world for about 8 years. And I also wrote the show a couple of years as well. But you start like 5 months out from the show. You start at about May and do the show for 2 hours in September. So you spend all of that time, all day, every day, all of that sweat, stress, tons of creativity that go into a 2 hour show, and then it's gone. And it is the strangest, most unsettling feeling you can ever have. It is like a bad hangover in a strange way. Because every other project you do, whether you're recording music or you're making a documentary or drama, you live with it in post and it replays. And, it's these children that you put out in the world. You have that time with them afterward, whereas a live one just leaves and it's gone out there and people have seen it and you never feel that interaction with it. There's a live audience there, which is a real rush. You have a hockey arena full of people watching your work, and that doesn't happen often in television, unless it is music or sports, right? It's a real different beast, and there's some real talented people in Canada. There's a bit of a circus, a core group of people that will move from the CSAs to the Junos to whatever, and they're so good at it. And to watch a director like Sheila O'Brien, if you ever get a chance to see her work, it's just remarkable how she watches all the screens in the mobile truck and calls for the switching of everything. And behind the scenes, there are stage managers moving one full band off the stage while the other moves on in 30 seconds while somebody's giving out an award. And the moving parts are so huge on something like that. So they are too in a feature and things, but there's no second take. You do it and it better go right. And I've had it go wrong, and it is a terrible feeling.
There's a whole other level of pressure, I feel like, because it's all riding on that one thing that you've been preparing for. So that I'm sure it's very adrenaline filled, but also I imagine be very rewarding.
It's, I think, almost like what I imagine an election would feel like. You spend all this time leading up to one night and everybody's watching the results come in, and you don't get to do it over.
For sure. So you kind of touched on this already, but what does producing in a smaller market entail? You mentioned diversifying, but what does that look like? What kind of things do you have to do that maybe people working in a bigger market don't?
Well, I think it's the variety of work, that we will do commercials, but Calgary has, more head offices than any other city in Canada, except for Toronto, but it's not retail based. So, you don't have your fast food and your retail things as much, but you have a lot of other work that has to be done. So you get good at changing gears. And the other thing that doing commercials teaches you is that there's an accountability of all this, that you have to be on time and you have to listen to the people that hired you, and you have to make sure that you have that balance of doing what they ask for you, but also kind of bringing them along when there's something that might be better. And that's not us saying, hey, we're the filmmakers, damn it, trust us on this one. It's a careful dance. And so I think there's a lot that you learn with that diversity, that if you develop your own project, then it's your project. But if you're always working with somebody and have to be accountable and have to collaborate, well, that just builds your skill set in a lot of ways. That diversity, I think that's what it brings to it. You accumulate a lot of different experience faster.
For sure. So going off of that, yeah, the producer is in charge of making sure the team is working well together and that the client is happy and getting what they need. So how do you mitigate those problems and creative differences, as well as making sure that everyone is working well together and in the end getting what they need to get?
That's a hard one, because everybody's come in with passion to this, and it doesn't matter what role you have on set, or if it's an ad agency person, they've come into it with something they're passionate about too, and their client's passionate about their business. Everybody has come there with that, and you can get a lot of type A out of that. But the real thing to producing that well is to realize that everybody's come there for the same reason, to make the best thing possible, and that at the end of the day, everybody has that goal. It's just about trying to listen to people and collaborate and try to figure out, okay, what are they needing to make this the best thing it can be for them, and how will that contribute to making it the best project overall. And you break up fights sometimes. It's a life of being a middle child, so that's a big part of it too.
So again, shifting gears a little bit, this one is more focused towards students. When you're doing non-union work or smaller projects, you are able to hire people that are just kind of starting their careers. What do you look for in emerging storytellers?
Well, it's not only the people that we hire. We take a lot of students on during the summer as well as interns and that sort of thing. And it's something we're really happy to do. We kind of look at it like we're teaching hospital to a degree. And we look for people that are self-starters, people that have a bit of a fearless quality to them. And again, that fearlessness and that passion doesn't have to come out in that obvious type A sort of way. In fact, it can be quite the opposite. It's fearless in that you are willing to ask questions, willing to walk into the room and just listen and volunteer and say, how can I do something? And don't be afraid to ask questions. That is the biggest thing of all. It's the people that sit back, that you don't know where they're at. But if you're in there and you're being present, and often that osmosis is very much part of the experience, that's what we look for. People that are willing to grow.
So you did a low budget feature kind of early on in your career, American Beer.
Hmm.
A lot of the people listening to this podcast will be in a position to be making their first features or web series or short films. Is there advice that you could give from your experience doing a very low budget feature for the students that are kind of going to be in this position?
Um, it's really changed since we did that film. We, I think, shot that on film, and it's very different now. That it's really democratic in terms of the gear people can have with cameras and editing. And we lied, cheated into things to to be able to get gear and edit and all of those classic filmmaking stories. But I think something that I took away from American Beer was making something right sized to an indie film. That we didn't try to do a giant sci-fi thing or a gangster film or something that was big on a small budget. We did something that felt like it had the spirit of an independent film and a small budget as part of the story and part of the spirit of it. And that's why I think it worked well, that we didn't try to squeeze something into a small space. We celebrated that we coerced our friends and had no money to do this. And it was sort of woven into the story. It was about people like us that were just trying to get by and have an experience with their summer. And that's what we were trying to do with the film. So if you find something right sized, that's the best way you can do it, I think. I'm not a feature guy that way, but I have worked with a lot of people making short films, students and otherwise, over the years. And I would say the same thing for that. If you're making a short film, don't just make a short version of a big movie, and don't have a beginning and a middle and end. Good short films should just be this interesting piece of the middle that should leave you wishing you knew what happened before and after, and just make it right sized to what you have.
So it's kind of about working within your means.
Hmm.
So, what skills do you think a producer should have to do well in the industry?
I think, again, listening skills. You need to take into account a lot of people's desires and the stakes they have in the project and what they need to do their job well. And so it is that listening, that collaboration, enthusiasm. You need to bring people along and have them feel good about what they're doing. The job, in a way, is almost like you're planning a party. You've invited everybody to this great party. Sometimes it's not a great party. Sometimes it's like a slideshow. And sometimes it's the best party ever. And you want everybody to feel good and feel that they're getting the most out of it. And so it is making sure that people have what they need to do their job the best, and the people that are asking you to do that job are feeling like they're getting the very best from you.
So, being a musician, because you do have a background in music and you play to this day, how does that affect the stories that you're drawn to, and how does that affect the way that you're telling them?
Um, Story wise, it affects things quite a bit. Like, I'm still working with a lot of things music wise. We just finished doing a special for Canada Day that was in lieu of the big outdoor party that we could have. So we were staging interesting performances in unique spaces. We did that with Balletlujah. We took what was a ballet on stage and put it into the real world. Music to me is something that is going to grow and exist with television and things, because it's still something that you can't always see the ending of in a lot of ways. But even beyond story, I think the skills I learned as a musician in playing in a garage band with a group of people are no different. If you are the loudest person in the room and you're just doing your thing, it doesn't work. But if you're listening to what everybody around you is playing and finding a way to fit in and contribute and make the whole better, that's the skill set right there. My job is, you guys are like way young for a Rolling Stones metaphor, but the job is being Keith Richards. Your job is to keep the machine running so Mick can stand out front and look good. If everybody's at the front, it falls apart. So your job is to maintain the machine and keep it moving along. So the similarities of music to producing and making film, whether it's a commercial or something like a doc, those cross over quite a bit.
So, the last question I have for you before I open it up to my friends is, what advice would you give someone interested in producing that is just starting out today?
Get out and observe people and watch how they behave and watch how they act. Something I got to do early on with a few producers in Alberta, but it's just watching, their decorum, their way of working with people, of handling situations. Because it's not like you're watching them do something. It's not like you're watching a specific skill over and over. Take the best from as many mentors as you can and watch how they behave and watch how they solve problems.
I think that's advice applicable to a lot of different roles. So yeah, so thanks for sharing that. I'm now going to open it up to my friends. So feel free to ask questions.
What differentiates from a good producer and a great producer? What is something that makes a person stand out in the producing role?
Ah, boy, that's a tough question. I think, if you're doing your job well, you've surrounded yourself with the best people you can. And being the producer isn't about, even though the title kind of implies that it's the boss and everything stops with you and you produce this, it's not. It's about bringing the best people you can to that project and letting them work. So to me, that's a good producer is somebody that's super organized and very detailed with the email and is on top of the information and everything. But I think to go to the next level, you bring everybody along to make them feel that they're doing the best they can do. And if you're being that way with everybody and everybody has felt that at the end of the day, I think that's what pays off to your project. I don't know if that makes the producer better, but it makes the project better.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much.
But just to add to that, the role is not like that old school demanding, yelling thing. It's about bringing people along. And I always beg to differ with people that you need to be that type A bossy presence to be in command of things. I think there are many other ways to bring good work out of people. And to me, that's somebody that can react to somebody one-on-one that way and be able to do that rather than just being the loudest voice in the room.
I have a quick one. You started off when Grant Harvey contacted you and you did third AD position, I believe you said.
Yes.
How did you evolve from that? Like, you had evolved from other careers as well, but how did you know from that first third AD position that this is what you wanted to keep going with? And eventually, how did you realize that producing is like what your calling was? Like, how did you establish that?
It's a nice story, and I'll be the first to admit it. It's not entirely true. It wasn't like, yes, this moment, that's what I want to do. I had already been writing and wanting to be in news, and that was my goal at the time. But while I was waiting for that opportunity and being in school and hoping to try to get a job, it was people like Grant that were taking a chance on me to say, hey, can you coordinate this music video for us? Can you help us with this commercial? And take it from there. So it was a slower process than having that moment, but I hadn't thought of producing other things. I had been very much focused on getting into news. So it wasn't until I had experience, just by default, getting to see how other production unfolded, that I realized, well, okay, I can do this in another world without having to keep applying to the news stations in order to work in this business. So when I kind of learned that there is a way to just go out and work and freelance and collaborate with people and work that way, then I was already doing it at that point. So it just unfolded.
That's honestly reassuring, because sometimes it's a lot looking out for that like one spark moment. And yeah, I like that. It's real. Thank you.
Yeah, it is. That's how it occurs, I think, for a lot of people, especially with producing, because producing grows out of so many other things too.
I did have one question that was submitted to me by someone who couldn't be here, so I'm going to ask that on behalf of them. And basically, they want to know, obviously, you're hiring a lot of people as the producer. So how important is building relationships, and how do you start to build a base of creatives that you will then, continue to hire?
Well, that happens two ways. In a smaller market, we don't have endless choices. So you want to be able to work with everybody because you never know who you're going to need to work with. But a base with creatives, honestly, it's kind of thing where, again, you want to surround yourself with good people, not only people that are skilled, but we always use the term people that you would hang out with in real life. Whether that you actually do or not is another matter, but can you get along with this person? And do you feel that they're bringing the best thing to it? So it's about surrounding yourself with like-minded people. And different creative voices have different uses too. Sometimes somebody is a great comedic storyteller. Sometimes somebody is very visual. Sometimes it needs somebody that is more of a writer, an interviewer type for, say, a documentary setting. And it's just about being able to determine the best fit that way and building up that roster all the time, because you never know. It always comes back.
My question is regarding finding budgets for films, because producing is really closely related to like finding budgets and investors and like pitching and like looking for that budget that is necessary for the production. And what would you tell someone who's only getting started, and what do you wish you knew when you were starting like pitching and like looking for that money to produce something?
I would apply to everything you can. Whether that's a grant for something or it's applying for development financing. I don't know what it's like out where you are. I know in Alberta there are development funds, our sister company in Saskatchewan, there's development funds, but try to get development money so that you can put it toward your pitch, put it toward your work. But in broadcast television, I can't speak to film as much as to how those things are financed. There's people that can give you a better answer for that. But in television, you are given a license fee that then you have to fill in the rest of the budget with other production tax credits and other production grants, sponsors, and you have to learn to bring other money to the table to round out your budget. But the discipline of learning how to fill out that grant application shouldn't be lost. There's people that do it very well, but when you're trying to get your idea off the ground, that tangible black and white exercise of being able to explain your project in a grant application actually does a lot. And it starts to educate you in how the pieces of the puzzle come together and the percentages you might get from a broadcaster and then what you would need to bring to the rest of it. Because it's never paid for in one shot. Usually it's pieced together. So the more you can understand about the process. And I think going through those steps just allows you to pitch and speak with some more authority by having to really break down your idea from being this awesome story to here's how it looks on paper in an application. So if you can talk about your idea in that world and talk about it passionately as a story, you'll be better off.
So I was just wondering, I know the industry can be very overwhelming and kind of all-consuming, so I was wondering how you kind of paced about projects and like paced out your year kind of dealing with burnout and exhaustion.
TV, and in particular advertising and broadcast cycles, there's an old saying of it's always summer on TV. So it can be very heavy seasonally sometimes. So yes, burnout factor can be high. That's something that we all have to watch in any job we do. But that's also just being able to watch your team, knowing when they've taken on too much, that everybody will say yes and wants to do the best thing, and having that leadership to say, okay, no, you're good. We're leaving you here on this one. We're going to bring this person on to help with that. Because if you try to do it all yourself or watch other people try to do it all themselves, and a lot of us will try to, if you let us, that's where the burnout occurs. And it goes back to that whole question you asked about having a roster of people to lean on. The more people you can build up, the more you have people to call in when you need them.
For sure. So before we go, I did ask you to prepare 5 recommendations of films, but I also opened it up for you because obviously you are doing a lot of different type of work. So if you have any short films or commercials that you'd like to share, music videos, then yeah, feel free to include those as well.
Yeah, that was a tough question. How do you pick 5 things? So I tried to pick 5 things that I kind of saw recently that might be applicable to the things we talked about today. One is one of my favorite movies of all time, is Lost in Translation. That it wasn't Sofia Coppola's first film, but it had a real indie vibe to it. And if you watch the commentary to it as well, it was very much seat of the pants. And there were things that weren't supposed to happen in the film that they left in. And it kind of celebrated the spirit of let's just go out and do this. That it had that indie thing to it. And again, something that was kind of right sized to the story they wanted to tell. Another thing I put down was if you've never watched any of it, watch anything by Ken Burns as documentaries. Because if you want to learn about writing and storytelling, that's masterful. Because, sometimes it's just showing a photo and having to tell a story or recreate a voice of somebody reading from an old transcript. And just so many interesting tools that what might appear slow in the world we're in is still compelling and gripping because of some great writing. If you've never seen it, a music film, The Last Waltz, and not only because Scorsese's amazing, but a new documentary on the band has just come out as well. But you've never seen that, it's a great music documentary because, again, you feel that everybody showed up for a different reason, not to make a good film, but to celebrate a moment in the history of this musical entity. And that's really captured in this film. And it really, again, feels like they didn't always know what was going to happen. And you can kind of feel that in the film as well. And music video, look up this one. It's what I think is the greatest music video of all time. And if you watch it and want to ask me why, but it's by a band called The Replacements, and it's a song called Bastards of Young. And then the last one I would say is a documentary I watched recently. I'm not a huge sports fan, but sports docs I think are always really compelling. The Michael Jordan one, Last Dance, is amazing, but there's ESPN has a show of 30 for 30, and I think they're all free. You can stream them or download them all, but there's this one called The Good, the Bad, and the Hungry, and it's all about the sport of competitive eating. So it's all about these guys that do the hot dog eating contests and all of that in record time. And you think, okay, this is going to be wacky and over the top and kind of silly. But they play it the same way as they would play Michael Jordan or somebody. And they let these people speak like the athletes they consider themselves to be. And the heartbreak and the drama that they feel goes with their sport. And they treat it on the same level as any other sport. And you see something very unusual told through those eyes. It's really worth watching. Oh, and then the other music one was Dave Grohl's Sonic Highways, which is amazing documentary storytelling with music. And it's one where the two worlds really cross over.
That's awesome. So that's all that I have for you today. Thank you so much for coming on, Brent, and thank you to everyone who asked questions. It was so great hearing more about the process and about some avenues in film and TV and broadcasting that I don't think people had necessarily considered, especially students. So I really appreciate you coming on and talking about that.
You got it. Thanks.
And that's all for this episode of Film Kid Asks. Be sure to subscribe and feel free to follow us on Twitter and Instagram or join our Facebook group. New episodes come out every Saturday.